Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I appreciate you journeying along with me because we get to travel the most interesting places. Salem today. What's going on in Salem? Well, maybe not right now, but let's talk to my guest about years ago. Carl, welcome to Journeys and Journals.
Bernie, thank you.
So what took you to Salem?
Well, you know, I'm an accidental politician, or at least I was. I never meant to become a state representative for this area. It just kind of happened. Kind of an interesting story. You know, I had been on the radio as a talk show host for lots of years, and our radio station sponsored a cruise to the Caribbean. And so...
you had to go along.
Well, yeah, I had to host.
That's part of it.
That's the hard work of radio. And so one night over dinner, and by the way, one of the listeners who went along was our state representative Bob Repine and his wife Penny. And so we were talking over dinner one night off Jamaica, and I asked Bob, I said, "What do you guys do up there?" I said, "I've interviewed you guys a million times, but I've never even been to the state capitol, and I've lived in Oregon since 1957. And here it was 1997, basically. Well, and so he spent the rest of the evening telling me what they actually do, what life is really like for an elected representative or senator in Oregon.
Now your job is interviewing people and running a radio station.
Like yours, you know, just meeting people, talking to them about what they do. And so we had a very pleasant dinner conversation, but a few months later I got a telephone call from him.
From Bob Repine.
From Bob Repine. And he said, "Is there any particular reason that you were asking about that?" And I said, "No, I'm just curious. You know, I'm curious about everything." And he said, "Well," he said, I think I'm going to need a replacement. I'm not going to run again. And so if you would like to be my successor, at least go for that, I'd like to talk to you about it." And so, wow, I'm thinking, I've always interviewed those guys. I never intended to be one of those guys. And so really the next thing you know, and you know, I just cut out a few details in the interim, the next thing you know, I get appointed to the office because he resigns early to take headship of a state department. Mm. And so I wind up being appointed to the office, and then I run for re-election 2 more times subsequently, and win those and finish out my 3 terms, which was capacity at that time. And so that's how I wound up being a politician.
Capacity?
Well, there were term limits at that time.
Oh.
And so I couldn't exceed those 3 terms in the House. And at that time, it was really time to head back home anyway, back to the family business.
Well, then the family business is what?
Is KJO and KLDR, both radio stations, AM and FM in Grants Pass, which family businesses since 1957.
Family business sense. Which one of these guys is Dad?
Well, that's my dad, and his name is Jim Wilson. He passed away back in 2005. And this is his friend, business partner, and just boyhood friend, Elsie Parker, who is alive today at 85, I believe. And he's still on the payroll, by the way. I need to mention that. He still caretakes our property for us, although he and Dad co-hosted a morning show, a brilliant morning show, together for 35 years. And made brilliant because they went back to their boyhoods together. And so much of what they did on the air reflected that great knowledge they had of one another.
And it was a mold, an opportunity to do something totally unique. I mean, they dreamt it.
Yeah.
The station itself, they dreamt.
Yeah, this is what they wanted to do. You know, my dad got involved in the radio business at a very young age because he like Elsie knew how to pick cotton in Oklahoma. That's what they did on adjoining farms. Kind of a subsistence lifestyle at that time. They'd pick the cotton and take it to the cotton gin and sell it. And they knew the misery of carrying a cotton sack down the rows in the heat and humidity of summertime Oklahoma.
At what age do you suppose he started?
They started young. They started very early on. I suspect they started when they were very young teenagers. And so,
I've heard of moms who made little sacks for their 3-year-olds.
no, yeah.
So you didn't have to have a babysitter. They had their own sack to pick cotton.
Yeah. Well, Elsie, my dad always kidded Elsie about being a city slicker because, Dad was down on the farm there quite some time, but Elsie moved down on the farm from a town of population about 65 or 75, I'd say.
Oh.
So that made him a city slicker.
Well, and the going to school must have been a chore then.
I don't think they enjoyed school all that much by the stories they
You had
used
to walk
tell.
for.
Yeah, they had to walk 4 miles uphill to get to school and 4 miles uphill to get home. So,
I
the
was
old story.
afraid you were going to say both ways. I could hear it coming.
And I've been down to the property. I really consider Oklahoma my home, although I've been in Grants Pass for 53 years.
Well, when you say Grants,
I always go to Oklahoma every chance I get.
how do you travel?
Always on motorcycle, really. I don't travel any other way.
Why?
I
Why?
love the freedom. I don't travel to Oklahoma on that one, I'll tell you. That's my town bike. I use that for running around town. But for the longer trips across the U.S. or back to Oklahoma, I have always gone on my Harley. And I decided about a year ago to pick up a BMW on eBay because I'm ready for a softer ride and a quieter ride. Getting old.
Well,
And
now,
so-
is somebody rides with you?
Yeah, my wife always rides on the back on all the big rides. Actually, we do a fly and drive a lot because she doesn't have the time like I do. She will do, like as an example, she'll fly 2 summers ago. I rode to Chicago, got up one morning on a Thursday and decided to ride to Chicago. And so I was there 4 days later, and she flew into O'Hare, and I picked her up there. And then we rode Route 66 all the way back from Chicago back to, I didn't want to go across the California desert. I'd been there before. So we cut north to the Grand Canyon, then across southern Utah, Nevada, and back into Oregon. So we do the fly and rides a lot. She'll fly someplace, I'll pick her up, and then we'll ride home.
South Dakota?
Yeah, the big Sturgis motorcycle rally. Yeah, I haven't been there since '03, and we talked about that last time I was here a long time ago, but I'm going back this summer. I had a friend call me not long back who said, hey, I'm not getting any younger, and I've never been there. I know you have, so would you take me there this year? So we're gonna ride our bikes. We're gonna meet up in Twin Falls, Idaho, and go the rest of the way together.
Well, if you happen to have a chance to go to South Dakota, I'll tell you, not far from where the motorcycles are famous is the Black Hills Spearfish.
Oh, yeah,
is the name
yeah.
of the town, and they have a passion play there, I believe, every summer. And I've been to Oberammergau and I've been to Spearfish, and I tell you, my heart
Well, really.
is in South Dakota.
Well, yeah, we always go through Spearfish on the way to Sturgis, and that's one of the last towns before Sturgis, Rapid City, in that area. And I agree with you, though. I mean, the Black Hills are beautiful, and that was a real surprise when I was there in '03. I never dreamed it would be that nice.
Have you taken that little side road and gone through the Needle? There's a road that's...
I've not gone through the Needle, but I've gone to Custer and Deadwood and Lead and all the little towns around there.
Oh, I felt like I was right back on Gunsmoke.
Oh, it's a great part of the world.
Speaking of that, Gunsmoke was done right here, 2 episodes, and we're trying to find out anybody who was on that show because they got locals. And, now there's TV being done elsewhere in Southern Oregon. I'm also anxious to find out people who can tell me about White City. There was a women's portion that, oh my, I just forgot her name. An actress had a big place over there, and she let the women who were in training, military training, or maybe cooks, I don't know.
I've heard that story before. I wish I could help you out because I have heard that story before.
Somebody out there's got to be.
And it was a big name. It was a big name, but not my generation, so I didn't hold on to that. But also, speaking of things that were filmed locally, Route 66 was filmed here locally as well. and at a house out on Lower River Road. And I can show you that house sometime, show you where it is. But there was an episode filmed out there back in probably '59, I would say, something like that.
And now there's a new show being filmed in Portland. You know, it's just incredible how relational it is, because they show the bridges and the hills and they show the scenery that I'm so familiar with.
Yeah.
How's your connection with Portland now? Your dad?
Well, my dad was only there in World War II, welding Liberty ships in the shipyards at Swan Island.
Oh.
And so when he left Oklahoma as a kid, he ran away and wound up working out in the shipyards during the latter stretches of the war.
Well, now he ran away from his buddy. How did they get back together again? Let's look at LZ and
Yeah, well,
Big Jim.
They got back together. They started talking, as I gather, in 1956, because they both had pursued independent radio careers. And so in 1956, when it was apparent that Dad was going to be putting KJO on the air, he called Elsie and found out where Elsie was and said, "Hey, why don't you come this way?" And Elsie said, "I'll be there Monday." You know, and that's exactly the way it turned out.
Did he ask him to bring any money?
I don't think he asked, because I don't think it would have worked. I don't think he had any.
And your dad had pockets full from the shipyards, right?
He had at least $10,000.
Well, that's big bucks back then, but
You know, yeah.
but that put it on the air?
Yeah, that's really what it took. About $10,000 to $12,000 to put the station on the air. Now, it's a different game in this day and age.
Yeah. About how much would it cost to put a station on like Better Life TV?
Well, I'll tell you, I can't imagine putting a radio station on the air in this day and age for any less than $120,000. And I'm talking about a bare bones FM station. It would cost you much more to put an AM station on the air, because you've got to have real estate. You got to have a tower, and now you can use someone else's tower, but it just costs much more to put an AM station on the air than an FM.
Well, this Better Life TV is a miracle story, and if you've not heard it, there is a book available. There's a story of how this came to be. One man had a dream. He had a friend. He had a friend who was a ham radio operator who had. They both, I think, are licensed, but they put their expertise together, and people said, "It can't happen in Southern Oregon. It's not possible for two guys."
Somebody has to have a dream.
It's not possible for two guys, and it's the same story.
Same kind
two
of thing.
guys.
Yep, that's right.
Had a dream.
Two guys and about two other folks, and about 4 people as they began the radio station. And they worked like crazy, but they got it done.
Well, let's get back to Salem, because did you bump into history up there? Did you get into meeting any of the old timers?
Not really. In fact, it's an interesting thing in Salem. The old timers are the lobbyists. That caste never changes very little. The caste of politicians in Salem changes constantly, every election cycle. So the people that tend to have the real institutional memory in the capital surroundings would be your lobbyists and some of your, well, the world calls them bureaucrats, but there's some very talented agency people who've worked many years in Salem.
And I bet you there's a lot of waitresses in hotels and restaurants that can tell yarns.
Well, that used to be a scene that was big. When you read Oregon legislative history, you read that when adjournment came at the end of the day, everybody took off and they went out together and socialized. Those days are gone. Doesn't happen much anymore. In the time frame that I was in, it was an interesting thing. At the end of the day, polarization had already hit, and people didn't go out doing the things that legislators traditionally did after hours. They went out to a water hole and drank and made legislation over the bar. That happened a lot. But when I was in 99, beginning in 99, actually 98, but when 1999 came, polarization was beginning to develop where nobody socialized anymore. And at the end of the day, everybody took off and went their own separate directions.
Well, I was just lucky enough to interview Deb Potts. Not once, twice, 3 times, or 4.
Yeah.
And he made me feel right at home to drop by and visit. So for each half hour on the show, I probably spent 2 or 3 hours just visiting.
Yes. I met Debs. I knew Debs very well. And in fact, I have his Mason's book of legislative procedures in my office out at work. He gave that to me, and he scrawled his name in big letters on it, Potts. And he was a good friend. He was a mentor of sorts as I began. He operated in the Oregon legislature in a time when there was a tremendous amount of collegiality, and a whole lot of law was made after hours. It's a great story, his story.
My privilege to meet these people like your mother-in-law, no,
grandmother-in-law,
grandmother-in-law, yes. These people that had known so much. She must have been born in the 1890s?
Yeah, in the 1890s back in Minnesota.
And with perfect...
brilliant recall.
And grace and charm and all those things that she brought to the show. I prize so many of the stories, and it's like as if I've gotten to adopt all these grandmas and grandpas.
Yeah, yeah.
Now that I'm that age, I keep thinking, where have they gone?
Yeah.
Because...
Well, true. You know, she had a great story back when you could drive without a license. And, you know, one of the stories that she probably told you the day she was here was about as she lived out in Forest Grove, driving elderly relatives into Portland, and she was only 12, 13, 14 years old behind the wheel of the car, you know. It was a different day. Muddy roads.
Yeah, Forest Grove was where she came from.
Yeah, that's where they headquartered up when they moved out from Minnesota.
And the family name?
The family name was Schultz and Templeton. She married into the Schultz family. So she was a Templeton by birth, but married into the Schultz family. And they were longtime Oregonians as well.
Oh, what an incredible opportunity I've had to talk to the people who have made history.
Yes.
And these guys, there are a couple of them.
They certainly made it here.
So what has it meant to be son of somebody famous?
Well, it's an interesting thing. You know, on a local level, he certainly was famous. And I think, you know, what I dealt with in that situation is the same that every person who grows up is the child of a famous person. And that is, you can either let them overshadow you and live in that shadow forever. And sometimes parents are happy to keep you in that shadow. And then there are others like my dad who, you know, I don't know if he ever thought about being a star. He was a very humble guy in that respect. He just considered himself a country boy who got really lucky.
I can almost hear him use that line.
Yeah, you bet. But, you know, not like he overtly promoted me, but he just wanted me to be successful, and he was happy for any success that I ever got. The only thing that I think I ever did that worried him was when I took the years out for politics, because my dad didn't think a lot, generally speaking, of politicians, and he didn't want me to become one of them. And that concerned him. He wanted to make sure that I was the same guy when I came home, too. I got to say, I was a lot wiser when I came home from Salem, but I hope I was the same guy. You know, he was concerned about that.
Well, I said to you earlier, you started dyeing your hair gray.
Well, it's a funny thing. I never had a gray hair until I got into politics, and I turned gray really quickly, and I attribute that to politics. I really do.
Well, I know one thing, that you took God with you when you went to Salem. And this is something I like to tell people, that no matter where you are, your values go with you.
Yeah.
And you make circles just as surely as the pebble makes ripples
Sure.
that go out and out and out.
Yeah, yeah.
there's no end to the good things that a good man, here, let's talk about these guys. The gift that my father and mother have given me, the incredible support. I just want to thank our seniors, even if they're not directly your family. There's somebody out there older than you who would love to talk to you.
Yeah.
And there's somebody younger than you that would love to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, there's a great example, a biblical example that I've always used, and that is the danger of pulling people your own age in as your counselors when you're a young person. It's a lot better to stick with the counselors of your father's age. And, you know, that's one thing that I was blessed with. Being around these two guys, it was like having two dads. It was indeed like having two dads. It's hard for me to say which one was the greater hero in my eyes. And these guys had, you know, they got great business ethics. And they taught us to do business in a way that not many dad figures teach their boys to do business by. And we learned, I like to think we learned well from them.
Well, Jerry Lewis, who's behind the camera today, said he was neighbor.
Next door neighbor to this guy right now. And I told Jerry he's a lucky man.
And Jerry has a funny story because he was in a restaurant about to have dinner, and they called his name, or called the name Jerry Lewis, but it wasn't him. It was some Jerry Lewis.
Oh, it was the other Jerry Lewis?
Yeah. And so they met and had a good laugh.
Yeah.
Now, your name.
Well, yeah, I ran into the real Carl Wilson, as I call him, the Beach Boy Carl Wilson.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was kind of fun. It was at
How'd
a broadcast convention, and the Beach Boys were playing. And of course, I had my name tag on, and I wanted to get up and meet him. And there are not that many Carl Wilsons. Well, now I'm aware of many more, but back in that day, I wasn't. And it was really fun bumping into him because he was kind of a childhood hero, you know.
All the better.
Yeah, you bet it was. Yes.
You know, you got one or two more stories. We've just got a little short time. Why don't you tell us about being a kid when you first came out to Oregon? What do you remember? How was it different from, where was it you came from?
Well, Hays, Kansas. And I got to tell you, Klamath Falls wasn't a lot different than Hays, Kansas.
Okay. Did you hit Klamath?
We hit Klamath. And
in
then,
the winter? Or?
Then, you know, I don't know when we got there, but it always seemed like winter to me. It always did.
I checked the weather today. It sounds like winter.
Yeah, you know, but Klamath Falls was an interesting time because my dad was gone all the time. He was young. He was making the down payment for Cajo and Grants Pass. That's what he was doing. And so I remember him being gone a lot, and I remember being cold all the time in Klamath Falls as a little kid. And the first place we stayed in was what I call a dump, and I'm glad my folks are not listening today. You know, Mom lives in Georgia now, and Dad, of course, passed away in 2005. But we lived in a dump in Klamath Falls, and I remember freezing to death in that place. But then we moved to a brand new duplex before we left Klamath Falls, and it was brand new. And of course, I go back and look at it every time I'm in Klamath Falls, and it's a dump now. But Dad, I think, was proud that we were upwardly mobile, and so we finished Klamath Falls in pretty good style before we moved to Grants Pass.
Well, now you said we. There's other kids in this family?
Well, not at that point in time. I was an only child for my first 10 years, really. And so it was just Mom, Dad, and me in those days.
In these dumps.
Yeah, that's true.
And the house that my folks came to, the $35 a month house, my dad thought that when they wanted to double the rent post-war, it was just unacceptable. Yeah. So that's when he bought the dump that was built like 60 years earlier and the ceiling sagged 6 inches, and
Sure.
he said, we can fix it up.
Yeah. Well, you know, I remember when I got out of the Navy in 1973 in April, Melinda and I came back to town from the Philippines and rented a really nice place down on Spruce Street in Grants Pass, a brand new duplex. And the local man who owned it sold it to some fellow from Ohio who was moving out here. And that guy raised the rent $8 or $10 a month. And I remember we had to move because of the rent hike. And so we had to move across town. I've often wondered, why didn't my dad raise my pay $10 a month so I didn't have to move? But we had to move for $10 a month.
Yep. And those were the days. And I wish we could somehow give that to kids instead of the need to have fancy shoes and all that. Because it was a good thing to have to figure out just how much we could.
That's true. Well, my dad was coming out of a very poor raising back in southeastern Oklahoma, and it was a big event if you had a dollar bill when you were a kid. You know, for me, you know, I remember, you know, making 25 cents an hour out at the radio station when I started answering the phone. But I remember when I got up to $1.25 an hour, it seemed like heaven. You know, it was amazing. $1.25 an hour.
And the radio stations, it's multiplied.
Yeah,
KJO is
KJO, and then now KLDR, the FM, yes.
Well, thanks for telling the story about roots and about your family and about courage, because on every level. Thanks again. When I heard that you served the U.S. military, I wanted to say thanks for that too.
Well, thank you. It was quite a time.
I waved the flag. That one's got 48 stars. That's the way it was when I was a kid. And I got it. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I sure do wave the flag. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm proud to live here in beautiful Southern Oregon, and I consider the whole area to be the hollow of God's hand. Northern California, now southern Washington. We've expanded.
Wow.
Thanks for tuning in.